Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Made for More podcast. I am joined by a very special and very funny guest. I have got with me Kate Burr. Hello, Kate. How are you?
Hello, Ali. It's so good to be here.
It is so great to have you here. As we like to start off these interviews, tell me, Kate, where have you come from and where are you going?
Right. Okay. So I'm not entirely sure where I'm going necessarily. I do know where I've been. So back in 2001, I was like thinking I really want to try stand-up comedy. So I did my very first ever open mic night back in 2001.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was back in the days when you had to I registered for Triple J Raw Comedy, and it was like you had to fill out a entry form on a piece of paper and send it in the letterbox. And as soon as I sent it, I was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? But anyway, did my first open mic night, didn't suck completely, so I kept going. And then I think it was in 2007, I did what everyone tells you not to do. I quit my day job and became a full-time comedian,
What?
which was pretty good fun. Yeah, so that freaked out a lot of people. But yeah, did end up doing the Adelaide Fringe Festival, and then went back to my day job and sat there, and I'm like, I'm not in the right job anymore. So I quit my job and did comedy full time. And then what happened, I had my daughter a couple of years later and couldn't do stand-up comedy the same way I used to, where you'd go out to a comedy club for 4 hours and do that. And I couldn't do that logistically because I had a little baby with me. So what I ended up doing was I started a comedy show at a local tennis club for mums. And
Ah.
the idea was that you'd leave the baby with dad, hopefully, and come out for an hour before and then you'd be home. You'd have a laugh, have a drink, and then you'd be home before anyone missed you. And so that sort of was where my business career sort of started. So I sort of started morphing from stand-up comedian to business owner because I was putting on comedy shows. And then not long after that, what happened was we had one show, we had a couple of mums come running up at the end and they said, do you do this as a fundraiser? And I'm like, yeah, we can do that. And they're like, this would be perfect for school. So it very quickly morphed from a local tennis club into a fundraising model where we'd go out to schools and sporting clubs and put on comedy shows. They'd sell the tickets, sell a few drinks, do a few fundraising raffles and stuff, and we'd make a whole heap of money and everyone had a good time.
That is awesome. I love that idea. I think bring that back.
Yeah. Well, we could if COVID behaves itself. Totally.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Fingers
Um,
crossed.
yeah, so what happened from there is I was like, okay, I'm full into business owner mode now. I need some more help with business stuff. So I went and joined a whole heap of businessy networking groups. And from there, I met a couple of professional speakers. And we're sitting around at a conference dinner one night, just opposite each other and talking about what we do. And this speaker said to me, what do you do? And I said, I'm a stand-up comedian. And she said, do you teach speakers how to be funny? And I'm like, why would I do that? That's not even a thing. She's like, it is a thing. And I'm like, no, it's not. And she goes, it is. And so she convinced me to start working with professional speakers and found out that it actually is a thing. And so for the last probably 5 years, I've been a humor coach to professional speakers, and then still getting drawn back in with all the businessy side of things. So now I also work with business owners and leaders and coaches to do humor, so use humor for engagement. So that's sort of what I do now, to engage people with your message and make sure that they engage their market. So that's sort of where I'm at now as a humor coach.
I absolutely love this. And you might not actually remember this, but earlier this year, we actually first met at a speakers event, at the PSA event here in Adelaide at the Arkabar.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of, pretty good headliners there. And I was having a bit of a fangirl moment. And you walked up and I was like, oh, what do you do? And you're like, I'm a humor coach. And I'm like, I've got no idea what that is, but I think I need you in my life. And fast forward, what is it, 10 months now? And here we are. And I love your story. I love hearing that you just, posted off your application. And is it hard to be funny on paper as opposed to being funny on stage?
Oh, luckily you didn't have to actually put any jokes on the paper. It was just like name, email, address, phone number. Oh no, not even email. It was like name, actual address, phone number, like
MySpace address.
Yeah.
That is so, so good. So can we backtrack a little bit? And can you tell
Totally.
me how you went from, that first Triple J, was it Triple J, did you say?
Yes.
Triple J comedy and then into the fringe. Talk about the transition. I've had a couple of fringe shows back in my heyday as a ballet dancer, and it's a real carny life, isn't it? It's awesome atmosphere. Tell me about your
Yeah.
experiences there.
Yeah, well, I think the first couple of years when I was on the open mic circuit, I was just completely terrified of what I was doing. And I was like drinking beers before I'd get on stage just to calm my nerves and get myself on stage and hope that I remembered all my lines. And I was really, really focused on myself and survive. I was basically in survival mode. And what happened as I started to actually get on top of that, I was like, oh, there's actually an audience in front of me and they're laughing, and oh, this is quite fun. And so when I sort of went from that survival mode into service mode for the audience, that's when the magic really started to happen. And it was sort of addictive beforehand, but when I actually got worked out that I could have that connection and interaction with the audience, it was just like, oh, I have to do this so much more now. And so when I was like, okay, what is the next step from doing the open mic stuff? The next step is stand up, like to do a fringe show. So I was like, oh, yep, I'll do that. But because I'd sort of hadn't, because normally with a fringe show and stand-up comedians, you do an hour-long show, and I didn't have an hour's worth of material. So I did a lunchtime show and I called it Back in 30 Minutes. So the idea was that you could go to lunch, watch a comedy show, and be back in the office in 30 minutes.
That is awesome. That is a great idea. Talk about your entrepreneurial notice a gap and fill it. I
Yep.
love that. Back in 30 minutes, you get a lunch full of laughs and then back to the office, probably in a little bit of a better mood.
Exactly.
So now you work with coaches and speakers, but you're also looking at, or you are also working with leaders around, how humor can actually help with staff engagement. And I think that, I mean, we've talked about this before, and I think that this is a missing piece of the puzzle and something you touched on before. Sometimes as leaders, we get so caught up in the seriousness of, what do I need to be doing? I've got my leadership hat on, don't let any chinks in the armor show. So tell me a little bit around, how humor works in the workplace.
Yeah, well, what sort of happened was when I was working with all these professional speakers and I was unpacking their messages, and then we'd put the humor in and then we'd put it all back together in a nice little package, I was sort of reflecting on my own stand-up comedy journey and my own journey with humor, and just gone, well, I think I've actually got a fair bit of potential here to come up with something as well. And so that's when I started to realize that what a comedian does to engage an audience is very similar to what a leader could do to engage their teams. Because when you like, the thing that with a audience is that you can get them laughing, you can get them having a good time, and then you can pretty much get them to do whatever you need them to do.
Awesome.
So you can get them to clap at the right spots, you can get them to be quiet and listen, even despite, if you think about a comedy club, there's drinking and there's darkness and there's distractions, and it's not an encouraging environment to, like, it's pretty hostile environment to get people engaged. But if you can actually get them together, and then you can take them on a journey, and then at the end they're all like, that was so much fun, we had such a good time, and telling the experiences afterwards. So it's like, what is a comedian actually doing that we can transfer back into the workplace and help the workplace engage their teams?
Very, very cool. So hopefully in the workplace, there's not so much drinking and darkness happening. Oh, maybe I could have a little comedy skit myself. I'm so funny today. So hopefully there's none of that drinking and darkness, but I definitely think there's a lot of distraction when it comes to workplace. When we're recording this right now, Adelaide's just about to go into, or is experiencing its second wave. And I think, because we're getting information at us so quickly, whether it's via email or updates or, staff meetings and, dare I say, air quotes, pivot, what are some of the keys to actually engaging people, off the stage? If you're a leader, what do we need to be doing to make sure that the message that we're saying or communicating is making sure that it's falling on engaged ears?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that we really need to focus in on initially is, how are people feeling? Because if you're so when you feel good, you do good, basically.
Yeah.
If you feel blah, you're not going to be doing as well. Like, you're probably going to be doing blah if you feel blah. So it's really focusing in on the feelings and going, what's actually people are dealing with right now that we need to navigate. And so I think a lot of the time people are just, I think a lot of people are pretty much overwhelmed at the moment. So sort of coming out of COVID, or if we're going into the second wave, it's sort of similar for both groups. It's like we've had so much change this year. We've had expectations changing a whole heap, and everyone's just a bit like, oh, they're done. Like we haven't got much left to throw at this. So it's you could probably, I think it's pretty safe to say that most people's moods are low. So how do we actually turn that around and get their moods a little bit higher so that then they've got capacity to do something with those moods, sort of thing. And obviously, humor is such a helpful way to do that. When I first started humor coaching, because I didn't really believe in it myself, because I was like, I don't think I'm still not convinced this is a thing. And obviously I was proven wrong many a time, but I went and did a whole heap of research around humor and what it actually does and the benefits of laughter and all that sort of stuff. And I was fascinated that I'd been doing stand-up comedy at this point for about 13 years and had no idea of there was a field called gelotology, which is the science behind the benefits of laughter. And I was like, wow, I didn't even know that was a thing. And so there's so many physiological and psychological benefits to humor that I think is really, really helpful, especially in these sorts of really crisis times that we're going through, that can help people just change their things. So if you think about laughter on a physical being sort of sense, what happens is it actually reduces your blood pressure and it improves your blood flow and it reduces your muscle tension as well. So it actually physically can relax people's bodies. And then on a psychological aspect, what happens with laughter is that it can actually reduce the cortisol levels, which is the stress hormones that are flowing around your body. It actually reduces them. It's been proven to do that. And it also increases your endorphin levels. So it's sort of like this almost like a buffer to just go, okay, I'm just going to put this all in and calm myself down and fill myself with endorphins. And that's going to help me manage the crisis time so much better initially.
So does it kind of work both ways? So you can use laughter to kind of, break down the stress, and then you can also use the after effect, the endorphins, for laughter to kind of act as like a little bit of a bumper. You like bumper cars, like a bumper zone, so that you have more capacity for stressful situations, should they arise. Yeah.
Totally. And to boost the mood. So basically, if you're focusing in on your team's feelings and they're like, everything's a bit low, bringing in a little bit of humor in the right way, of course, which I'm sure we'll get to in a minute, bringing in that little bit of humor is going to reduce the stress levels and increase the mood straight away. And it's sort of like, I like to think of laughter in this sort of a situation like a pressure release valve. It's like, and it's like, let's just blow the tension off, because if things are on the boil, it doesn't take much to set somebody off. And so it's like, how do we just take that level right down so there's a lot more capacity before, like we've got a bit more resilience before we blow our loads, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome skill to be able to have. Like, firstly, to recognize, what's going on, read the room of what's happening with your teams, and then also have something in your toolkit to be able to go, what, we need to kind of release the stress pressure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned about having the right kind of humor. So I've got 4 kids. The 2 eldest, 7 and 5, can read now. So they've been bringing home some joke books from school. So they are obsessed with knock knock jokes. They're also obsessed with why did the chicken cross the road jokes, but they don't understand that they're separate jokes. So for about 3 months, we've heard like knock knock, who's there? Why did the chicken cross the road? No, that's not how you do the joke. So for anyone who isn't naturally funny, can we talk about what is not appropriate, because we know what appropriate humor is, but how do you be funny without, cracking some knock knock jokes or why the chicken crossed the road jokes?
Totally. All right. So first of all, I think we're going to take a step back and look at humor, the definition of humor. So a lot of people, when they think of humor, they think of it in the traditional entertainment, humor for entertainment purposes. So when it's humor for entertainment and we see stand-up comedians and knock-knock jokes and all of that sort of stuff, people are thinking about it in the terms with the outcome of being, we're cracking, like being funny, cracking jokes and getting laughs. Now, if we have that as the focus in a business context, that doesn't really fit in as nicely and neatly in a business context, because we don't want everyone cracking jokes in the workplace. We don't need to get heaps of laughs, and we don't need to be funny. What we need to be thinking about humor is in the terms of a business context is getting people's attention, having connections, and getting engagement with our teams. So it's like we think about it from the point of view of attention, connection, engagement, and that's like ACE, which is like the ace up your sleeve.
Mm-hmm.
So instantly that turns humor from a high pressure situation where we have to get people to laugh is to how can we bring in a bit of humor just to make people feel comfortable? How do we use humor to make them connected with us and get them engaged? So it's a very different focus, which also means that it doesn't need quite as hardcore approach of let's tell a joke, 3 people walk into a bar, or knock knock, who's there? Because that sort of leads on to the next bit, Ali, of what my number one mistake that I see people using when they use humor in a business context is that they go, oh, we'll just tell some jokes. Now, jokes are the worst way to be funny. I have a saying, if you want to be funny, don't tell jokes.
That's a good joke.
Yeah. And the reason is because what happens when people tell a joke is it puts the other party on high alert. So it's because they go, oh, so this person's telling a joke, it better be funny. And so then the next question they ask when somebody's finished telling the joke is it funny? And if it is funny and they get a laugh, congratulations, you win. But if it's not funny and they don't laugh, it leaves a very awkward situation.
Oh, you don't know if it was meant to be funny or not meant to be funny, or if you should do a sympathy laugh. I see the problem.
And the other problem with that too is that it puts the other recipient in a high conflict or confrontational situation. Because if I start telling a joke, there's a high expectation that you're going to laugh. And if you don't laugh, one of us is wrong. I'm either wrong for not telling something funny, or you're wrong for not laughing at my funny joke.
Interesting.
And so in times of crisis where we're trying to connect with each other, telling jokes that set up a confrontational situation actually does the reverse of what we need it to do.
Oh, shivers. Yeah.
Yeah.
What a mess.
Yeah.
So if you could walk around with someone all day in the office and you had your sort of humor barometer, do we want people to kind of be like on the verge of, being engaged and humorous the whole time? Or do we want it to ebb and flow? Do we, leave it in our pocket? What's your expertise on like how funny and how frequently do you want to be bringing humor into the workplace?
Yeah, well, I think it's definitely you use humor like a spice. Not enough and you can't taste it's there, too much and it just overshadows everything. So I think if you're not using any humor in your workplace at all, you can probably put in 1 to 2 bits of humor a day, and that would probably have a big change. And then you just keep slowly adding until you go, yep, I think we've got the balance. But I think also for leaders, what they need to realize is if you're grading on a curve from a leadership to humor sort of ratio, most leaders probably aren't actively using humor.
Yeah.
And so a little bit is going to go a long way.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously when we work with people, that I talk about this all the time, that, there's this variable where everyone's a little bit different and we're all uniquely different. So are there different types of humor that resonate with different people, or is there kind of like a blanket level of humor, or how do you do that when there's all sorts of different people in your team?
Yeah, so the trick with humor is that there's 2 parts to it. One of the bits is what is said as far as the humor is, and then the other part is how it is received.
Uh-huh.
So you need to make sure that your humor is tailored to the audience.
Yeah.
And a classic example of this is a couple of years ago, Kanye West, hopefully everybody knows who Kanye West is a musician, was doing a collaboration with Paul McCartney from the Beatles.
Right.
And his Twitter feed blew up with all his fans going, it is so great to see Kanye helping out an old musician, helping him get his foot in the door. And isn't Kanye amazing?
Oh, I can see where this is going. Yeah, carry on.
And from your shocked silence response there, Ali, I can tell that you're just like, I think Paul McCartney was doing the favor to Kanye, and and we sort of get the laughter and the joke there, because we're old enough to know Paul McCartney from the Beatles and how big he was. However, you couldn't sort of share that story with a group of younger people, sort of like primary school, high school students, because they wouldn't necessarily get who Paul McCartney was. They would probably only know who Kanye West was. So when you sort of you want to make sure that the humor is relevant to the audience, because they will actually get it. So you have a think about in your workplaces and your teams, what sort of demographic is there? Is it like lots of young graduates, or is it more senior people, or is it more approaching the end of their working career sort of age groups? Have a think about what their lives look like. How are they sort of, are they living with their parents? Are they living with their children? Are they living by themselves? Are they living in a share house? Because they're the sorts of clues that get left as to what people are most likely to be able to understand. And obviously, people working in an office is going to be slightly different to people working out on the field. And so making sure you share experiences that are going to be common for the people that are listening to them.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice. And I think sometimes we try and do the one size fits all, whether it's humor, whether it's communication, whereas in actual fact, we need to be making sure that we're tailoring it to on the receiving end rather than on the giving end.
Yep.
So for those listeners who are like, yeah, this sounds really good, but my job's really serious, what's the science behind humor? Like, why does humor work?
See, humor, because I was saying before about how I didn't really take the humor thing very seriously.
Yeah.
One of the when I was doing all my research to justify my position, basically,
Yeah.
I came across a study by the researchers at Stanford University about the effects on the brain.
Love it.
And so what basically happens is one hemisphere of your brain has to analyze the words and the structures, and the other hemisphere has to actually get the joke. So both sides of your brain work at the same time to get the joke.
Yeah.
And then the motor cortex section. So if you put a head, like if you imagine putting your sunnies on the top of your head, the bit that sort of goes across the top of your head, that's the motor cortex section. And that bit is responsible for the actual physical making you smile and laugh. So that bit gets lit up as well.
Yeah.
And then the occipital lobe, which is at the back of your head, like if you sort of
had a ponytail or something.
Yeah, where you put your ponytail, or if you put your hands behind your head and put your feet on your desk, that sort of spot.
Oh, yeah.
That's the occipital lobe, and that creates the visual imagery. And then the limbic system, which is the emotional center. So if you imagine a big basketball, and if you imagine right in the center of the basketball, that's the limbic system. That's responsible for the emotions. So all parts of somebody's brain fires up when they laugh. And so it's a really good way to get people sparked up. And then what happens from there is that it improves your capacity for understanding and learning retention and remembering things later as well. So it really just fires everything up. And if we've got any listeners who are just like, she lost me way back at occipital. I've got no idea what she said right now. I just want you to imagine, like, think about if somebody laughs, it's like fireworks going off in their brain, like everything sparks and fires at once. All parts of your brain fire.
And so when that happens, so when we do get a laugh and, the fireworks are going off, it means that all of the brain's lit up and ready to listen, learn. So that's why it's the perfect time for engagement. I love it.
Yeah. So if we can sort of get that happening in our team's brains, then they're going to be much more switched on to do the work that they're meant to be doing, and the performance is going to improve and the productivity is going to improve.
Yeah, we want all of those things.
Yeah.
So probably, maybe not promising anything, this could be my last question, but I might have another one. How do you do this now? Like what we're doing, via Zoom or as an online, does it have less impact? Do you need to up your funny levels, your humor levels, or how does it work when you are in a virtual team?
I think that I think it's mainly about sharing, like when we're all separated, the best thing that humor can do is combine us and give us that shared experience.
Yeah, awesome.
So and we don't have to write the humor ourselves. We don't have to come up with it ourselves. We can just be the curators of it. So a morning email that has the instructions for the day, for example, with a funny meme at the bottom, is probably going to make sure that everyone opens that quicker than if they just had the instructions for the day.
Interesting. I like that. That's a little leadership 101 hack. Add a meme to your morning email. Good one.
So that people open it. Because I don't know about you, but I've got a mortgage broker who sends out a newsletter every quarter, I think it is. And there's a funnies section in that. And so every time that comes, I open straight to the funny section, read the jokes or whatever, and then I will flick through the rest. Like then I'll read the rest of the magazine. But it's that thing that inspires you to open that email first?
No,
or that
I don't.
message
I
first?
don't think I must need to get on a
Oh.
better email list. I think I don't get any of those types of things. So, and then when you're looking at that, is it if it passes the funny factor, like you're like, yes, okay, I'll read the rest of the email, or is it just kind
Yeah.
of get you in that learning state straight away?
Well, it just sort of gets people, looking forward to your emails if there's a funny
Ah,
meme in it. And so then it sort of, it's like that hitting the reset button on the day. It's like, okay, we've had a bit of a laugh now. We've reduced our blood pressure. We've increased our endorphins. We've fired up our brain, and now we can sort of do things. And it's that continual repetition of that sort of stuff.
yeah.
So there's plenty of memes on Facebook that you can sort of get to. I run a Facebook group called High Performance Humor, and it's a free community. And in there is a whole heap of appropriate work memes that you can pick out. So you don't even have to go searching. You just join that Facebook group and get all of them straight away.
Awesome. So we'll put the link to your Facebook group into the show notes.
Yeah.
So before we say see you later, what would be your top 5 tips for our listeners around, upping their humor in the workplace, or, perhaps even in their families? Sometimes it can get a bit serious.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the tips that I think has got massive potential in a workplace is starting off meetings with a YouTube clip of a stand-up comedy performance. Um, and what I would, this is like secret leadership tip, is start the video 3 minutes before the meeting time. So everyone makes
Okay.
sure that they're at the meeting on time. So if you're running a meeting live, it's much easier to do in a conference room. If you're running it on virtual, just play the YouTube link before you start your video, start your meeting, because that just gets everyone focused in on just like, okay, we're going to watch something. Now, the other thing too is that it's hard to find, or it may be hard to find an appropriate YouTube clip. So in that Facebook group that I have, there's a Make Meetings Better hashtag. And there's some
Cool.
videos in there that will get you started. So my first tip would be just start to incorporate like memes or YouTube clips during the day. Because what happens is if you have the stuff that I've got in that Facebook group, a lot of it is stuff that people can have a shared experience about. So it may not necessarily be a laugh straight away, but then they can have a reference point of like, oh yeah, you remember that video about the triathlon? Yeah, that's what you were doing on the weekend when you're running. So it sort of gives people a shared experience to talk about other than just work. So that's the first tip.
Love it. Love starting a meeting with a movie. I find that that's so good. People are like, oh, goody, we're going to be able to watch a little bit of TV before our meeting. This is so much fun.
and
Pro
it
tip.
may only be 3 minutes, but it could be the 3 minutes could make the whole meeting change. So it could be quite a fascinating thing. So that's number one. The second one is fill up on funny. So if you want funny to come out of you, funny needs to be in you. So make sure you fill up on that. And we talked about the High Performance Humor Facebook group. There's heaps of stuff in there that you can fill up on funny with, because they're the sorts of things that you can just shoot out in a message every now and then, just to go, here, thought of this and saw you. And it just sort of helps keep that funny going. We talked about don't tell jokes.
Yeah.
That'll be tip number 3, don't tell jokes. And the sort of addition to that is use stealth humor, which is the sort of humor that I teach my clients, which is like, you don't feel like you're being funny. Your recipient doesn't feel like you're trying too hard, but we're all connected and engaged and having a good time. So that's sort of tip number 3. Tip number 4 is remember that we're not using humor for entertainment in a business context. We're using it for attention, connection, and engagement. And that just takes the pressure off having to be hilarious and turning it into just be using that for connection and engagement and getting people's attention. So that's the ace up your sleeve.
Love it.
And then I think the other thing is to ask yourself why you want to use humor in the first place. So are we trying to find the fun in a hard situation? Are we trying to manage the mood of our team to keep their spirits up? Are we trying to make a connection with somebody? Are we trying to keep them engaged? And really have that reason that you're doing humor first and foremost, so that you can then use the right appropriate humor and the right amount of humor to get that result.
Love it. So many good tips. And I think I'm definitely going to be trying to incorporate a little bit more humor as an engagement strategy. And I particularly loved your pro tip at the beginning with flicking on the YouTube video and starting your meeting with a giggle. How good is that?
Like, how much more fun would everyone
Oh,
have if they're just like, yeah, we're going to watch a video before we start the meeting?
so much fun. I remember years ago, actually, before like Zoom was so prolific, is there was, like a couple of skits around what happens in a virtual meeting where like someone drops out, and they kind of did
Yeah,
it as a
yeah.
YouTube, but the audio was of people like dropping out and someone being in a shopping center and like breaking up, and it was hilarious. And I used to play that all the time.
Yeah.
And you're right, it got heaps of engagement. And everyone was like, yeah, you're like, Bob in the meeting from the YouTube video.
And that's the sort of thing where I was talking about having that shared experience, because
Yeah.
then there's a reference point. You go, oh yeah, you're like that guy, and then
Yeah.
everyone has a second laugh down the track when
Yeah.
the movie stopped even playing.
So good. I love it. So we'll put the link in to the Facebook group into the notes. But if anyone wants to, I guess, supercharge their humor, where can they go to find that?
Yeah, so the absolutely best way to get in contact with me is I've got a bit of a gift for all your listeners, Ali.
Oh,
It's called
thank you.
it's called the Humor Booster, and it's 5 steps to use humor to engage people. So if you go to my website, which is kateburr.com.au/gift, and I'm sure you'll put that in the show notes as well.
I will.
Ali?
I will
Yep, good.
definitely put that in there. So the humor booster, and it is gift as in GIFT, not the funny GIF that you could probably also use in your
Yeah, no,
emails. But we'll put the notes in there put the link in the show notes. And thank you so much, Kate, for lighting up today's episode on the Made for More podcast. I am looking forward to hearing from our listeners about how they're putting some more funny in so they can get more funny out. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you, Ali.